In the final days of winter in the year 1428, smoke rose above the waters of Lake Texcoco. The island city of Tenochtitlan stood surrounded by enemies. Fires burned along its causeways. Warriors shouted war cries across the lake. And at the heart of it all stood a people on the brink, the Mexica. They were not kings or conquerors, not yet. They were survivors. Once refugees from the north, the Mexica had wandered for generations. They arrived in the Valley of Mexico with no land, no allies, and no power. For years, they served more powerful city-states like Azcapotzalco and Colhuacan, enduring humiliation and betrayal. But now, after decades of suffering, they faced their greatest test, annihilation. The enemy had come not just to defeat them, but to erase them. This is the story of the Battle of Colhuacan, the moment when the Mexica fought not for glory, but for survival. It is a tale of courage, strategy, and transformation. It reveals how a once scorned people turned the tide of history, laying the foundation for an empire that would rule for a century. This battle did not end in a single day. It was part of a larger struggle, filled with betrayals, shifting alliances, and moments of near collapse. Yet through it all, the Mexica endured. The Battle of Colhuacan is not confirmed as a single, historically verifiable battle, but it likely represents a symbolic or mythologized version of real conflicts and challenges the Mexica faced during their early years in the Valley of Mexico. The term Colhuacan literally translates to the place of the ancestors, or the hill of Colhuacan. It appears in early Mexican narratives as a symbolic or semi-legendary event tied to their struggle for legitimacy and survival. Let us step back into that time, before empires, before conquests, to understand how one small group of warriors changed the fate of Mesoamerica forever. To understand the Battle of Colhuacan, we must first understand the world in which it took place. By the early 13th century, the Valley of Mexico was home to a network of powerful city-states. These included Azcapotzalco, Texcoco, Tlacopan, and Colhuacan, all of which controlled trade routes, farmland, and tribute-paying towns. At the center of this system was the Tepanec Empire, led by the formidable ruler Tezosomoc, whose capital was Azcapotzalco. The Mexica entered this world as outsiders. According to their own histories, the Mexica came from a mythical homeland called Aztlan, somewhere to the northwest. Guided by their god Huitzilopochtli, they migrated southward in search of a promised land. Around the year 1300, they reached the Valley of Mexico, a fertile region surrounded by mountains and dotted with lakes. But they were not welcomed. The local city-states saw the Mexica as a strange and unwelcome people. Their customs were different. Their language, Nahuatl, was similar but distinct from others in the region. Most importantly, they had no land of their own. For years, they served more powerful city-states like Azcapotzalco and Colhuacan, enduring humiliation and betrayal. But now, after decades of suffering, they faced their greatest test, annihilation. The enemy had come not just to defeat them, but to erase them. They fled once more. This time, however, they did not run far. They regrouped and prepared for what was coming. War was inevitable. After the assassination of their leader, the Mexica faced a decision: submit or resist. Under the leadership of Azcapotzalco, the fourth ruler of Tenochtitlan, they chose resistance. Azcapotzalco was a man of vision. He understood that survival required more than bravery. It required alliances. Alone, the Mexica could not stand against the might of Azcapotzalco, but if they could find allies who shared their grievances, they might have a chance. He turned first to Tlacopan, his nephew and chief advisor. Tlacopan was a master strategist. Unlike many leaders of the time, he did not seek personal glory. Instead, he focused on reshaping Mexica identity. He rewrote their history, turning them from wandering outcasts into chosen warriors destined to rule. Together, Azcapotzalco and Tlacopan sought allies. They approached Nezahualcóyotl, the exiled prince of Texcoco. His father had been killed by Moxtla, and he had spent years hiding in the hills. He agreed to join the Mexica, seeing in them a chance to reclaim his kingdom. They also reached out to Tlatelolco, despite tensions between the two cities. The rulers of Tlatelolco agreed to fight alongside Tenochtitlan, not out of love, but out of necessity. They too feared Moxtla's growing power. Thus, the Triple Alliance was born. In 1428, the alliance launched a campaign against Azcapotzalco. The war lasted 100 days. Battles raged across the valley. The Mexica fought fiercely, using their knowledge of the lakes and canoes to strike quickly and retreat safely.
At last, they captured Azcapotzalco. Moxtla was defeated. He surrendered and was executed. Victory gave the Mexica new status. No longer servants, they were now rulers. But peace did not follow. Old enemies still lingered. One of them was Colhuacan. Colhuacan had once given the Mexica refuge. Long ago, when they were wanderers without a home, Coxcox had allowed them to settle under his protection. But that alliance had collapsed violently. Now, Colhuacan was once again a threat. During the war against Azcapotzalco, Colhuacan had sided with Moxtla. They had not sent armies, but they had refused to help the Triple Alliance. That made them dangerous. Itzcoatl and Tlecailel knew that peace would not come while Colhuacan remained free. If left unchecked, Colhuacan could rally other city-states and launch another attack. The Mexica had won once, but they could not afford to lose. So they prepared for war. But this would not be a simple conquest. Colhuacan was a strong city with deep roots in the region. Its rulers traced their lineage back to ancient times. Its people remembered when the Mexica were nothing. The Mexica knew they could not win through force alone. They needed a plan. Colhuacan was one of the oldest city-states in the Valley of Mexico. Its name meant place of the slope, or place of the ancestors. It was known for its rich history and religious significance. Unlike Tenochtitlan, which was still young, Colhuacan had existed for centuries. It was believed to have been founded by the Toltecs, a powerful civilization that came before the Mexica. This gave Colhuacan a kind of spiritual authority that many other cities respected. Its rulers claimed descent from these ancient kings. They saw themselves as protectors of tradition and order. To them, the Mexica were upstarts, invaders who had no right to claim power in the valley. This belief fueled their resistance. Even after the defeat of Azcapotzalco, Colhuacan did not accept the new order. They refused to pay tribute to the Triple Alliance. They gathered warriors and prepared for war. To the Mexica, this was not just a political challenge, it was an existential threat. The tension between the Mexica and Colhuacan was not only recent, it went back to the earliest days of Mexica settlement in the valley. When the Mexica first arrived, they were desperate for allies. They sought the favor of Coxcox, the ruler of Colhuacan. He allowed them to settle near his city, offering them temporary shelter. In return, the Mexica offered loyalty and service. One of their leaders, Azcapotzalco, was even partly of Colhuacan descent. He had been raised among them and understood their ways. But trust did not last long. The Mexica asked for a marriage alliance. They requested one of Coxcox's daughters to strengthen ties between their peoples. Coxcox agreed. But when the ceremony was over, the Mexica returned her body, flayed and dressed as a goddess. To the Mexica, this was a sacred act. They believed she had become a divine figure. To Coxcox, it was an insult, a violation of his family and his rule. He declared the Mexica enemies. They fled into exile, wandering until they found the island where they would build Tenochtitlan. That betrayal never faded from memory. Now, decades later, the old wounds reopened. After the defeat of Azcapotzalco, the Mexica were stronger than ever before. But they knew that true stability required control over all the surrounding city-states. Colhuacan stood in the way. Its refusal to join the Triple Alliance meant that it could become a center of rebellion. Other cities might look to Colhuacan for leadership. If they formed a new coalition, the Mexica could find themselves surrounded by enemies once more. Azcapotzalco and Colhuacan understood this risk. They also knew that time was not on their side. The longer they waited, the more Colhuacan would grow in strength. They decided to act. First, they sent messengers to Colhuacan. They offered peace if Colhuacan would recognize the Triple Alliance and pay tribute. The rulers of Colhuacan refused. They responded with defiance. They said, "We remember your origins. You were servants. You were outcasts. You have no place among rulers." These words confirmed what the Mexica already feared. Colhuacan was not just resisting tribute, it was denying the Mexica's right to exist as equals. There would be no peaceful resolution. War was coming. The Mexica did not rush into battle. They studied Colhuacan's strengths and weaknesses. Colhuacan had a large population. Its warriors were well-trained and experienced. Its walls were strong. Direct assault would be costly. Instead, the Mexica chose a different path. They used psychological warfare. They spread stories of their victories. They reminded other city-states of what happened to those who opposed them. They also targeted Colhuacan's allies. They sent emissaries to nearby towns, offering safety and trade if they would abandon Colhuacan. Some accepted, others hesitated. Meanwhile, the Mexica began raiding supply lines. They disrupted food shipments and attacked caravans. Colhuacan's economy weakened. Inside the city, fear grew. Then the Mexica moved. They launched a campaign of quick strikes and ambushes. Using their canoes, they struck at Colhuacan's outskirts. They burned crops, they captured prisoners, and finally, they marched toward the city itself. The Battle of Colhuacan did not take place within the city walls. Instead, it occurred on the open fields near Lake Texcoco. The Colhuacan army met the Mexica outside their city. They outnumbered them. Their warriors wore the finest armor. Their banners flew high. But the Mexica had something more powerful than numbers. They had unity. They had purpose, and they had the memory of every humiliation they had suffered. The battle began at dawn. Mexican archers fired arrows from behind cover. Warriors armed with macuite, wooden swords lined with obsidian blades, charged forward. The sound of war drums filled the air. At first, the Colhuacan forces held strong. They pushed back the Mexican lines. But then the Mexica revealed their strategy. They split into smaller groups. They attacked from multiple directions. They used the terrain to trap enemy soldiers. Canoe units cut off retreats. The tide turned. By midday, the Colhuacan army was in disarray. Many warriors fled. Some surrendered. The Mexica pursued them to the gates of Colhuacan. The battle was won, but the war was not yet over. The Mexica laid siege to Colhuacan. They blocked roads and waterways. They built barriers to prevent escape. Inside the city, panic spread. Food ran low. Disease followed. Within weeks, Colhuacan surrendered. The Mexica entered the city not as conquerors, but as victors. They took prisoners. They executed some of Colhuacan's leaders. They destroyed temples that honored gods of the old regime. But they did not destroy the city itself. Instead, they absorbed it. They placed loyal rulers in charge. They integrated Colhuacan's people into the Triple Alliance. They ensured that Colhuacan would never rise as a rival again. The defeat of Colhuacan marked a turning point for the Mexica. It showed that they could not rely on strength alone. They had to use strategy, diplomacy, and psychological pressure to secure their dominance. It also taught them that memory is power. The Mexica never forgot how they had been treated. Every betrayal, every humiliation
became part of their identity. These memories drove them forward. From this moment on, they were no longer seen as outsiders. They were rulers, and their empire was just beginning. The Mexica knew they could not afford to make mistakes. Colhuacan was no weak opponent. It was an ancient city with strong walls, seasoned warriors, and deep ties to other city-states in the Valley of Mexico. A direct attack would be costly, perhaps even disastrous. The Mexica had learned from past defeats that strength alone was not enough. Victory required planning, patience, and precision. So under the leadership of Tlatelolco, the chief advisor to Azcapotzalco, the Mexica devised a strategy built on 4 key pillars. 1. Disruption of supply lines. 2. Isolation of allies. 3. Psychological warfare. 4. Intelligence gathering. This plan did not rely on brute force. It relied on weakening the enemy before a single arrow was fired in battle. The first step in the Mexica's plan was to cripple Colhuacan's economy by cutting it off to access for food and trade goods. Colhuacan, like many cities in the Valley of Mexico, depended on a network of roads and waterways to move goods. Farmers brought maize, beans, and squash into the city through well-worn paths. Traders carried cotton, obsidian, and cacao from distant regions. The Mexica targeted these routes. Using fast-moving canoes, Mexica warriors raided small boats carrying supplies. They ambushed carts on land, burning grain stores and scattering livestock. Over time, food became harder to find inside Colhuacan. Prices rose. People grew anxious. This disruption weakened morale long before any real fighting began. The Mexica also attacked nearby farmland. They burned crops and destroyed irrigation systems. Without fresh harvests, Colhuacan's people faced hunger. By the time the Mexica army moved toward the city, Colhuacan was already suffering. Colhuacan was not alone. It had friends among other city-states that still resented the rise of Tenochtitlan. The Mexica understood this threat. If Colhuacan formed a new alliance, it could rally forces powerful enough to crush the Triple Alliance. To prevent this, the Mexica acted quickly. They sent envoys to nearby cities. These messengers reminded rulers of what had happened to Azcapotzalco. They warned that Colhuacan's defeat was inevitable.
and they offered safety and trade in exchange for loyalty. Some cities accepted, others hesitated, but none dared to openly support Colhuacan. In this way, the Mexica ensured that Colhuacan would face them alone. Even more importantly, they turned some of Colhuacan's former allies into their own supporters. This shift gave the Mexica not only political advantage, but also additional troops when the battle came. The Mexica were not just warriors, they were storytellers. They used fear as a weapon. Before the battle even began, they spread rumors throughout Colhuacan. They said that their gods had chosen them for victory, that the sky had darkened in warning, that anyone who opposed them would suffer divine punishment. These stories reached the ears of soldiers and civilians alike. At night, Mexica warriors painted their faces and wore masks of jaguars and eagles, symbols of their elite warrior societies. They marched near Colhuacan's borders, making loud war cries. They lit torches and performed mock battles, creating the illusion of a much larger army. Inside Colhuacan, panic grew. The Mexica also held public ceremonies in Tenochtitlan. Priests made sacrifices to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war. Warriors danced in full armor. These displays were meant not only for their own people, but for spies and traders who would carry word back to Colhuacan. They wanted the enemy to believe that the gods themselves stood with them. And many did. The Mexica did not fight blind. They sent spies into Colhuacan. Some were disguised as traders or laborers. Others were captured warriors who claimed to have switched sides. These agents gathered vital information. Where were the city's strongest defenses? How many warriors could Colhuacan field? Who were the leaders most likely to resist? This intelligence helped the Mexica plan their attacks. It told them where to strike first and which parts of the city were weakest. More than that, the spies spread misinformation within Colhuacan itself. They whispered that some of the city's leaders were secretly negotiating with the Mexica, that certain warriors were ready to defect. Doubt took root. Trust eroded. And when the Mexica finally arrived at the battlefield, Colhuacan's leaders were uncertain whom they could trust. While the Mexica worked to weaken Colhuacan, they also prepared their warriors for the coming conflict. Training intensified. Warriors trained in groups, learning how to fight together. They practiced formations, how to move quickly across different types of terrain, and how to respond to sudden changes in battle. Discipline was strict. Orders had to be followed without question. A single mistake could cost lives. Each warrior was taught to use the macuatl, a wooden sword lined with sharp obsidian blades. They also carried chimali shields made of wood and leather, often decorated with feathers and paint. Archers trained with itzpapalotl, or bows, and tlacuatli, or arrows tipped with obsidian or bone. But weapons were not all they trained with. The Mexica believed in the power of their gods, so they trained spiritually as well. Priests led rituals to honor Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, the rain god. Warriors fasted and prayed. They sought omens in dreams and in nature. They believed that courage in battle was a gift from the gods, and that cowardice would bring divine punishment. This belief gave them strength. And when the day of battle approached, the Mexica army gathered in Tenochtitlan. Priests walked among the warriors, blessing them with sacred smoke and chants. They painted protective symbols on their skin. They tied eagle feathers into their hair. Then came the sacrifices. Captives taken during earlier raids were brought before the great temple of Huitzilopochtli. Their hearts were removed as offerings to the gods. Blood flowed down the stone steps. To the Mexica, this was not cruelty, it was duty. They believed that the gods needed nourishment to grant them victory. After the sacrifices, the warriors ate a final meal together. They shared stories, jokes, and memories of home. Some would return, many would not, but all knew what they were fighting for. Their city, their people, their survival. At dawn, the Mexica army left Tenochtitlan. They moved in formation, guided by experienced commanders. Canoe units traveled ahead, scouting for enemy patrols. Messengers rode between units, ensuring communication stayed strong. Behind them, the city watched. Women and children lined the causeways, waving and calling out blessings. The Mexica marched with purpose. They were not going to conquer. They were going to survive. And nothing would stop them.
The Battle of Colhuacan had ended in Mexica victory. The enemy army was scattered. The city of Colhuacan lay weakened and vulnerable. But for the Mexica, this was not the end of their struggle. It was only the beginning of a new chapter. Victory on the battlefield did not mean peace. It meant rebuilding, consolidating power, and sending a message to any who might still resist the rising Triple Alliance. In the days following the battle, the Mexica moved swiftly. They captured prisoners, destroyed key defenses, and established control over the surrounding lands. Their actions were not just about securing territory. They were about ensuring that no one would dare challenge them again. One of the first steps after the battle was the handling of prisoners. Many warriors from Colhuacan had been taken alive during the fighting. Some surrendered when they saw the defeat was certain. Others were found hiding in the fields or among the ruins of burned-out homes. These captives were brought back to Tenochtitlan. Some were chosen for ritual sacrifice. The Mexica believed that offering blood to the gods ensured continued favor and strength. These sacrifices took place at the top of the great temple, Templo Mayor, where priests cut out the hearts of the captives and raised them toward the sky in honor of Huitzilopochtli, the god of war. This act was not done out of cruelty alone. To the Mexica, it was a sacred duty. They believed that the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and that humans owed them blood in return. Other captives were not killed. Instead, they were used as laborers or slaves. Some worked on building projects in Tenochtitlan. Others were sent to work in chinampa fields or mines. A few were allowed to stay in Mexica society, especially if they showed loyalty or skill. Over time, some of these individuals became part of the community, even marrying into Mexica families. Colhuacan never fully recovered from its defeat. Though the city itself was not destroyed, its political and economic power declined rapidly. Many of its leaders were executed or forced into exile. New rulers were placed in charge by the Mexica, men who were loyal to Tenochtitlan and understood their role as subjects of the Triple Alliance. Tribute demands were imposed immediately. Colhuacan now had to send goods, food, and labor to support the growing empire. This included cotton, maize, beans, and luxury items like feathers and obsidian blades. Over time, Colhuacan became a tributary state, providing resources but holding no real power. Its people adapted, but they never regained their former status. The Mexica made sure of that. They stationed warriors in nearby towns to monitor activity. They built roads and canals that connected Colhuacan more closely with Tenochtitlan, making it easier to move troops and supplies. By controlling trade and communication, the Mexica ensured that Colhuacan could never rise again as an independent power. While Colhuacan faded, the Triple Alliance grew stronger than ever. Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlatelolco formed a powerful coalition that now controlled much of the Valley of Mexico. With Colhuacan defeated, other cities began to reconsider their positions. Some chose to submit peacefully, sending tribute and swearing loyalty. Others tried to resist and learned quickly what happened to those who opposed the Mexica. Within a generation, the Mexica launched campaigns beyond the valley. They conquered cities in the mountains and along the Gulf Coast. They demanded tribute from distant regions. They built a vast network of roads, temples, and markets. The Mexica were no longer seen as upstarts. They were rulers, and they ruled with both strength and strategy. The Mexica understood the power of history. After the battle, they recorded their version of events in codices, painted books that told stories through images and symbols. These records celebrated their victory and emphasized the idea that they were chosen by the gods. They rewrote their past to make it clear that their rise was destined. According to these accounts, the Mexica had always been strong. They had suffered trials, yes, but only to prove their worthiness. Every betrayal, every hardship was part of a divine plan. This narrative helped unify the people. It gave them pride in their identity, and it served as a warning to others. The Mexica had risen from nothing, and they would not fall again. The Battle of Colhuacan taught the Mexica several key lessons. 1. Strength alone is not enough. Victory requires planning, intelligence, and diplomacy. 2. Alliances are powerful. By working with Texcoco and Tlatelolco, the Mexica gained the support they needed to win. 3. Fear can be a weapon. Psychological warfare played a major role in weakening the enemy before the first arrow was fired. 4. History shapes the future. How a people remember their past influences how they face the future. These lessons would guide the Mexica in the years to come. They would shape the way they fought wars, governed cities, and treated their enemies. The Valley of Mexico looked very different after the battle. Where once there had been many rival city-states, now there was a dominant power. The Mexica had proven that they could not only survive, they could conquer. But they also remembered their origins. They did not forget that they had once been wanderers without land, that they had been forced to serve others, that they had faced near destruction more than once. That memory kept them focused. It reminded them that power must be protected, that complacency leads to downfall. And so, the Mexica remained vigilant. They expanded their military, they trained new generations of warriors, they built alliances and crushed rebellions. Their empire grew. And for nearly a century, it stood unchallenged. Though the Battle of Colhuacan was a local conflict, its effects rippled far beyond the Valley of Mexico. It marked the moment when the Mexica transitioned from survivors to rulers. It laid the foundation for the empire that would later meet the Spanish. Without the lessons learned here, there may have been no Tenochtitlan to greet Hernán Cortés in 1519. No great capital filled with gold and stone temples. No mighty warriors to resist the invaders. The Mexica rose because they adapted, because they learned, because they remembered.
And though their empire would eventually fall, the story of their survival, of how they fought against all odds, remains one of the most powerful chapters in the history of the Americas. History is often written by the victors. In the case of the Mexica, their own records, preserved in codices and oral traditions, shaped much of what we know about the Battle of Colhuacan. These accounts paint a picture of brave warriors, wise leaders, and divine favor. But like all histories, they are not complete. Behind the official stories lie hidden truths, facts that were ignored, forgotten, or deliberately left out. These lesser-known details reveal a more complex and human side of the battle. They show that the Mexica were not invincible gods on earth, but real people with fears, doubts, and flaws. Let us uncover some of these overlooked aspects of the Battle of Colhuacan. One of the most surprising facts about the battle is the role played by women. Mexica society was deeply structured around gender roles. Men were expected to be warriors, builders, and rulers. Women were seen as caretakers, weavers, and mothers. But during times of war, these lines blurred. In the days leading up to and during the battle, women took active roles in supporting the Mexica forces. They prepared food for warriors, carried supplies to the front lines, and even helped defend Tenochtitlan from surprise attacks.
Some women worked as healers, tending to the wounded and using herbal medicine to treat injuries. Others acted as messengers, carrying information between commanders when formal communication lines were broken. There are also hints that some women may have taken part in actual combat. While no record exists of women fighting directly in the Battle of Colhuacan, there are accounts from other battles where women defended homes and temples when cities were under siege. These contributions were rarely recorded in official histories, yet without them, the Mexica could not have sustained their campaigns. Another uncomfortable truth is that not all Mexica warriors fought bravely. The idea of the Mexica as fearless warriors who never wavered in battle is a myth. Like any soldier facing death, many felt fear. Some ran when the battle turned against them. During the Battle of Colhuacan, there were moments when the Mexica line nearly broke. The enemy pushed hard, and for a time it seemed possible that the Mexica would be overwhelmed. In those moments, some warriors fled the battlefield. Desertion was not uncommon in Mesoamerican warfare. Even among the elite warrior societies, such as the Jaguar and Eagle Knights, there were those who chose survival over honor. Those who fled were often punished after the battle. Some were executed. Others were stripped of rank and forced into labor. But this reality shows that the Mexica were not superhuman. They were ordinary men, driven by duty, belief, and sometimes desperation. Official Mexica records speak of their victories with pride. They highlight the strength of their armies and the wisdom of their leaders. What they rarely mention is the true cost of these wars. The Battle of Colhuacan was no exception. While the Mexica emerged victorious, they paid a heavy price. Many warriors died in the fighting. Entire families mourned the loss of sons, brothers, and fathers. Estimates of casualties are difficult to confirm, but based on later battle records and archaeological evidence, it is likely that hundreds, if not thousands, of Mexica warriors lost their lives in the campaign against Colhuacan. The city itself suffered greatly. Fires burned through neighborhoods. Fields were destroyed. Trade came to a halt. The people of Colhuacan faced hunger and disease in the weeks after the battle. This destruction did not end with the Mexica victory. It continued long after, as both sides struggled to rebuild. Yet none of this appears in the grand narratives carved into stone or painted on codices. The official story focuses only on triumph. Another common misconception is that the Battle of Colhuacan was a single decisive engagement. In reality, it was part of a larger military campaign that lasted for months, possibly even longer. The Mexica did not march into the field one day, fight a great battle, and return home victorious the next. Their campaign involved raids, sieges, ambushes, and political maneuvering. Before the final confrontation, the Mexica engaged in months of economic warfare, disrupting trade routes and weakening Colhuacan's ability to sustain its army. They sent spies into the city, gathered intelligence, and turned allies into enemies. Then came the actual fighting, a series of smaller battles that wore down the enemy before the final showdown. This slow, methodical approach was key to their success. But because history favors dramatic moments over long struggles, the full scope of the campaign is often overlooked. Perhaps the biggest misconception about the Mexica is that they were always victorious. In reality, the Mexica lost many battles before the Battle of Colhuacan. They were not an unstoppable force from the start. Early in their history, they were defeated repeatedly by stronger city-states like Azcapotzalco and Colhuacan. They were driven from lands, forced into exile, and made to serve as mercenaries and tribute payers. Even during the campaign against Colhuacan, there were setbacks. Some of their raids failed. Some of their allies hesitated. Some of their plans backfired. Their rise was not due to luck or divine favor alone. It was earned through years of struggle, adaptation, and learning from failure. The Battle of Colhuacan was not the beginning of their power. It was the result of years of effort. Finally, we must acknowledge something often ignored in historical accounts: luck. The Mexica were skilled strategists and warriors, yes, but timing also played a role in their success. At the time of the battle, Colhuacan was weakened by internal conflict. Its leaders were divided. Some factions wanted peace, others wanted war. This lack of unity made them vulnerable. Also, the Mexica had formed a powerful alliance just at the right moment. Had Texcoco or Tlatelolco chosen differently, the outcome might have been very different. Sometimes history turns not only on courage and strategy, but on small moments, decisions made in secret, alliances formed at the last minute, or unexpected events that shift the balance of power. Recognizing these lesser-known facts does not diminish the greatness of the Mexica. If anything, it makes their achievements even more impressive. They were not born rulers. They were not guaranteed success. They were a people who rose from obscurity through determination, resilience, and adaptation. By understanding the full story, including the failures, the losses, and the hidden contributions of those often left out of historical histories, we gain a deeper appreciation of their journey. And we remember that history is not just about heroes and victories. It is about real people making real choices in real moments of crisis. The Battle of Colhuacan was more than a military victory. It marked the moment when the Mexica shifted from being outsiders to becoming rulers. Before this battle, they were seen as wanderers and servants. After it, they were recognized as a force to be reckoned with. But their rise did not happen overnight. The years that followed were filled with hard work, careful planning, and continued warfare. The Mexica did not simply conquer and rule. They built. They built cities. They built alliances. They built a system that allowed them to control vast lands and diverse peoples. And in doing so, they created one of the most powerful empires in Mesoamerican history. After defeating Colhuacan, the Mexica did not stop. They used their momentum to expand their influence across the Valley of Mexico and beyond. The Triple Alliance, formed by Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlatelolco, became the core of a growing empire. These three cities worked together, dividing responsibilities. Tenochtitlan provided military leadership. Texcoco managed laws, culture, and education. Tlatelolco controlled trade and markets. Together, they launched campaigns against other city-states. Some surrendered without a fight, others resisted and were conquered. Each new conquest brought more tribute, more warriors, and more land. This cycle fed itself. The stronger the Mexica became, the easier it was to grow even stronger. Within a few decades, the Triple Alliance had extended its power far beyond the lake region. They controlled cities in the mountains, along the coast, and deep into the southern highlands. The Mexica had become the dominant power in central Mexico.
At the heart of this growing empire stood Tenochtitlan, the island city where it all began. From humble beginnings on swampy land, Tenochtitlan grew into one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. By the early 1500s, it had over 200,000 residents, making it larger than many European capitals at the time.
The city was built with precision and purpose. Canals crisscrossed the streets like rivers, allowing people to travel by canoe. Markets bustled with traders, selling everything from food to gold. Temples rose above the skyline, honoring gods and marking the city's spiritual center. The Templo Mayor, or Great Temple, stood at the heart of the city. This massive structure was dedicated to two gods, Huitzilopochtli, the god of war, and Tlaloc, the god of rain. Every year, rituals were performed here to ensure divine favor. The Mexica also built aqueducts to bring fresh water from the mainland. They constructed causeways linking the island to surrounding lands. And they expanded their famous Chinampa farming system, creating floating gardens that produced enough food to feed the entire city. These achievements showed that the Mexica were not just warriors, they were engineers, planners, and builders. As their empire grew, the Mexica developed a highly organized society. They established systems for collecting tribute, governing cities, and maintaining order. Every conquered city was required to send tribute to Tenochtitlan. This included food, maize, beans, cacao, luxury goods, feathers, gold, jade, and labor for building projects or military service. This tribute supported the capital and funded further expansion. The Mexica also maintained a bureaucracy to manage their empire. Officials called calpixque oversaw tribute collection. Local rulers were allowed to govern as long as they remained loyal. Education was another key part of Mexica life. Children attended schools based on their social status. Calmecac schools trained noble children in leadership, religion, and writing. Telpuchcalli schools taught commoners about warfare, history, and duty. These institutions ensured that each generation understood its role in society. Religion played a central role in daily life. The Mexica believed that the gods needed human blood to maintain balance in the world. This belief led to the practice of human sacrifice, which was both a religious act and a political tool. Sacrifices were performed during festivals and before major battles. They were meant to honor the gods and remind people of the cost of survival. Despite their cultural and economic achievements, the Mexica remained a militaristic society. Warfare was not only a means of expansion, it was a way of life. Mexican warriors were highly trained. Boys began training at a young age. They learned how to use weapons, such as macuahitl, a wooden sword lined with sharp obsidian blades, tlacochli, arrows tipped with bone or obsidian, chimali, round shields made of wood and leather, and itzpapotlo, bows used for hunting and combat. Warriors could earn rank through bravery and capture. The most skilled fighters joined elite warrior societies, such as the Jaguar Warriors and Eagle Warriors. These groups were not just soldiers, they were symbols of strength and honor. Their armor and headdresses marked them as leaders on the battlefield. The Mexica also used psychological warfare to weaken enemies before fighting. They spread rumors, staged public sacrifices, and marched in full view of enemy cities to show their strength. Their strategy was simple but effective. Break the will of the enemy before breaking their walls. Though the Mexica became a mighty empire, they never forgot where they came from. The Battle of Colhuacan taught them valuable lessons that shaped their future. 1. Unity is strength.
Alone, the Mexica were weak. With allies, they could defeat powerful enemies. 2. Adaptability wins wars. The Mexica changed their tactics based on the situation. They used canoes, spies, and diplomacy alongside swords and spears. 3. Fear is a weapon. Psychological warfare helped them win without always needing to fight. 4. Survival requires sacrifice. The Mexica paid a heavy price for every victory, but they believed it was worth it. These lessons guided them as they expanded their empire. They applied the same strategies in later battles and campaigns. Even as they ruled from grand palaces and temples, the Mexica remembered where they came from. They saw themselves not as kings born to rule, but as survivors who had earned their place through struggle. For nearly a century, the Mexica ruled with little opposition. Their empire stretched across much of modern-day Mexico. Their capital was among the greatest cities in the world. But their dominance would not last forever. In 1519, a new enemy arrived from across the sea, the Spanish. Led by Hernán Cortés, these foreign invaders brought horses, guns, and steel weapons, tools the Mexica had never seen before. They also found allies among the Mexica's conquered subjects who were eager to rebel. The Mexica fought bravely, but they faced enemies unlike any before. Tenochtitlan fell in 1521. Yet, even in defeat, the legacy of the Mexica endured. Their story is not just one of conquest and empire. It is a story of resilience, adaptation, and transformation. They began as refugees. They became rulers. And though their empire fell, their spirit lives on.